Hello and welcome to Enterprise Architecture with Eamon McCormick. In these videos we're going to have a discussion about enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is actually a pretty complicated topic with lots of different elements, and this is the first of our videos. So we're going to take it fairly slow, walk through the concepts, give you a few examples over the series. But we wanted to get started with a discussion of how to think about architecture services and why they're important. So one of the things that we've been noticing out in the business environment, I am a leader of an enterprise architecture practice at a Utilicast, which is a consulting company. What we've actually been noticing out in the marketplace is that there's a strategic problem that most businesses and frankly governments are facing today, and that they really lack a strategic way to translate their strategies and their plans into actionable implementations. And that's really where enterprise architecture comes in, because the real focus of enterprise architecture is to bridge the gap between strategy, planning and execution. It is true, of course, that enterprise architecture can be used to validate strategies and can be used to do simulation, but that's a little bit of a more advanced topic. So ultimately the main thing if you have a strategy is you've got to think about, how am I going to translate my strategy in a holistic way into my business and my technology operations? And that's really where the gap is, and that's why enterprise architecture is becoming such an important point and such an important thing in the business world today. So what does that really look like? The dilemma is that people have an understanding, maybe not always perfect, of what their business current state is and what their IT current state or their information technology current state is, and they want to be able to get to a future state, both on terms of a target business state and a target IT space. And that's where enterprise architecture comes in, because it's a strategic piece of this enterprise strategic function, because it's really translating the plans into actionable blueprints that the business can use to operate. And that's becoming ever more important, especially today, as we're seeing such an amount of change in the business environment, especially driven by things like technology, COVID-19, climate change, technological change, etc. So research does indicate that enterprise architecture does provide measurable value to businesses. We've seen IT costs going down, and we have seen better alignment. But I think measuring the value of IT, enterprise architecture to IT is a little bit narrow, because it doesn't capture the true value of enterprise architecture if it's done right, which is to, as I said, help the company achieve its strategic objectives and do that in a holistic fashion. So I think although enterprise architecture grew out mainly out of the information technology realm, we really need to look at it more holistically as we go forward. So what is a good definition of architecture? According to the ISO for 2010-2011, architecture is the fundamental concepts or properties of a system in its environment, embodied in its elements, relationships, and in the principles of its design and evolution. I wanted to try and point out a couple of key things that may not be quite obvious from that rather kind of technical definition of what is architecture. Firstly, it's guided by principles. Principles are an incredibly important part of architecture, because they are the guiding directions that you need to keep, that provide the guardrails for architecture. There are different types of principles. There are business principles that guide the business architecture, and there are principles that guide the IT architecture. But principles and establishing the principles are really important. I've had a lot of experience with principles, and really by establishing principles up front you can avoid a lot of hand-wringing and arguments later on, because you get some consensus about the rules of the road for the architecture, which is actually very useful and absolutely essential. We'll talk a little bit about more principles in a little bit more detail, but for example, a principle would be buy before build, which is essentially a principle that says we prefer to buy things than build them ourselves. The other aspect of architecture is ilities. So there are really two aspects to properties. There's qualities and properties. Qualities are what the architecture looks like to the customer, the person who is the consumer of the business or of the business services. And then there's the properties as it respects to the internal characteristics that are required in order to meet the qualities of the services that are being delivered. Then, of course, there's the environment, who the actors are, and then that can be regulatory, that can be the business actors, that can be the people, the types of customers, the technological drivers. And then there's the elements and the relationships. Um, the elements in the relationships are broken down into various different types, and we use a language to describe all of these things, which we call Archimate. And architecture is developed via a modeling tool. So to sum up today, it's really critical. Enterprise architecture is really critical for success in today's businesses. It is not easy to succeed at enterprise architecture, but it is vital for the corporations in today's business environment. And that breaks down into two ideas. Number one is you got to understand that enterprise architecture is vital for your business. And then number two is you got to think about how to build enterprise architecture into your business as a capability. And that's the idea of setting up an operating model. In our next presentation, we'll dig a little bit more into the different types of architecture and what an enterprise architecture landscape looks like.